The call came in at 8:43 on a Tuesday morning, and I know that because I was staring at the microwave clock trying to figure out if I had time to make Darius a real breakfast before the school bus came, or if it was going to be another peanut butter on whatever bread hadn't gone hard yet. My name is on the caller ID of exactly 3 people's phones who actually pick up when I call back, so when mine rang from a 1-800 number I didn't recognize, I almost let it go. But something made me answer. Something made me wipe my hands on my jeans and tap that green button. And what I heard on the other end changed the next 14 months of my life. Mr. Pemberton? The woman's voice was careful in that way that usually means, someone's about to tell you. A bill went to collections. This is Lorena Vasquez calling from Hartwell Community Bank. We have a flag on your account. Are you available to come in this morning? Not later this week. This morning. I told her I could be there by 10. Darius was 7 at the time, and he was sitting at the kitchen table drawing something in one of those composition notebooks he carried, everywhere, completely unbothered, the way kids are unbothered when the world is falling apart around them, because they don't know yet that it is. I watched him for a second. He had his mother, Priya's eyebrows and my nose and this gap between his front teeth that his dentist kept, saying would close on its own. I'd moved us into my grandmother's old place on Carmichael Lane 4 months earlier, after Priya and I signed the divorce papers and she got the house we'd bought together in Clarkdale, and I got the contents of my savings account, which at that point was enough to cover first and last month's rent, somewhere decent or nothing, depending on how you looked at it. I chose nothing, technically. I chose Grandma, Celestine's house on Carmichael Lane, because it had been sitting empty since she passed, because my Aunt Nadia had power of attorney over the estate, and she said I could stay there while the family figured out what to do with it, and because it cost me exactly $0 a month that I didn't have. The house smelled like her still, like the cedar sachets she kept in every drawer and the Pond's cold, cream she'd used every night for 60 years, and something else underneath all of that, something warm and old and specific to her that I couldn't name, but that hit me every time. I walked in the door and made me stand there for just a second longer than I needed to. The divorce had not been mutual in the way divorces are sometimes called mutual, meaning both people decide together that the marriage is over and part ways like adults. What it had actually been was Priya telling me in January that she'd been unhappy for a long time, that she needed to prioritize herself, that she'd already spoken to a lawyer, and me sitting on the edge of our bed, trying to figure out which part of that sentence to respond to first, while our son slept down the hall. I'm not telling you she was a villain. She wasn't. We were 2 people who had been slowly becoming strangers for years, and had both been too scared to say it out loud. But the timeline she'd been operating on and the timeline she handed me were very different things. And by the time I got my feet under me, I was already out of the house and into Grandma Celestine's, buying store-brand cereal and doing mental math every time I opened the refrigerator. I dropped Darius at school and drove to Hartwell Community Bank. Hartwell wasn't a big bank. It wasn't a small bank either, in the way that some local banks feel like a man's living room with a teller window. It occupied a squat brick building on Desmond Avenue that had been a savings and loan in a previous life, and they had maybe a dozen branches spread across the county. The kind of institution where people go because their parents went there and their parents before them. My grandmother had banked there since 1974. That was the first thing Lorena Vasquez told me when I sat down across from her in a glass-walled office near the back, in a chair with wooden arms that was not quite comfortable, enough to make you feel like a guest. Celestine Pemberton was a customer here for 51 years, she said. She had a pen she kept clicking with her thumb, not impatiently, just as a habit. She opened her first account in 1974, checking, then savings. Then a CD in 1988. She was in the system so long she predated our current software migration. We have her records going back to paper. I nodded. I didn't know where this was going. You used a debit card linked to her estate account last Thursday, she said. At a Piggly Wiggly on Route 9. And there it was. I want to explain this carefully, because the way I'd understood it was not the way it actually was, and the difference between those 2 things almost destroyed me. When Aunt Nadia gave me permission to stay in Grandma Celestine's house, she'd also handed me a cardboard box of things she'd found in the kitchen junk drawer. Batteries, rubber bands, a flashlight that needed new batteries, 2 takeout menus from restaurants that had probably closed, and at the very bottom, a Hartwell Community Bank debit card in my grandmother's name. Nadia had said, almost as a throwaway, "There might be a couple dollars in that account if you need it for the utilities. The auto-pay stuff, just until we get the estate sorted." I'd taken the box, I'd found the card, and yes, I'd used it. $78 and change at the Piggly Wiggly on Route 9. Baby carrots. A rotisserie chicken, juice boxes for Darius's lunch, a thing of laundry detergent because we were out. What I did not know, because Nadia had not known, because nobody had looked closely enough, was that Grandma Celestine's account at Hartwell wasn't just an account with a couple dollars for utilities. Lorena slid a printed statement across the desk, and I looked at the number at the bottom of it, and I thought for one full second that I was reading it wrong. I was not reading it wrong. My grandmother, Celestine Ruth Pemberton, who had washed other people's laundry for 30 years, before she got her GED at 52, and became a medical billing specialist, who drove a 1998 Buick LeSabre with a cracked dashboard and a passenger door that only opened from the outside and said that car was fine and she didn't need a new one, who pressed her own hair with a hot comb every Saturday night before church and bought her clothes from the Goodwill on Fremont and made us eat every last thing on our plates because food was not something you wasted in this family, had quietly, methodically, over 51 years, accumulated a balance of $342,000 in a Hartwell Community Bank account that nobody in the family knew existed. "I need a minute," I said. Lorena said, "Take your time." I did not take my time. I sat very still and stared at the number on that statement and did the math in my head, which was a pointless thing to do because the math was right there on the paper, but I couldn't help it. $342,000. The woman who had made me eat the fat off a pork chop because waste was a sin. The woman who kept her thermostat at 68 in January because heat cost money. The woman who had given me $20 every single Christmas inside a card and who I'd always thought was being generous with what little she had. "Why is there a flag on the account?" I finally asked. Lorena clicked her pen twice. Our fraud detection system flagged the transaction. The card has been inactive for a long time, years. When it showed activity, the system escalated it automatically. She paused. And then it escalated higher when the name on the card matched an account of this size. Higher to who? To our branch manager, and then to our regional manager, and then to our executive team. She folded her hands on the desk. "Mr. Pemberton, our CEO, Franklin O.C., called me personally this morning. I thought she was going to tell me I was in trouble. I thought this was going to be the part where she said fraud and unauthorized use and the word charges. And I thought about Darius at school drawing in his composition notebook. Completely unbothered, and I felt a cold pull in my stomach. He didn't call because you'd done something wrong," she said. And she said it like she'd seen the look on my face and wanted to get ahead of it. "He called because Mrs. Celestine Pemberton was personally known to him. She was known to a lot of people here." She looked at me steadily. "She co-signed a small business loan for Franklin, O.C.'s mother, in 1998. He was 17. He remembered her. I didn't have anything to say to that. She was also known to our former branch manager, Doris Achebe, who retired in 2019, and to at least 4 of our current tellers who had worked with her for years. When her name came up this morning, people knew who she was." Lorena leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Pemberton, as the estate's potential heir, and given the unusual circumstances of this account, Mr. Osei would like to meet with you in person. Today, if possible." He drove in from the regional office in Beaumont. I looked at the statement again. $342,000. "Why didn't anyone know?" I asked. Not Lorena, not really. Just out loud. She answered anyway. She never listed beneficiaries on this account. She never brought anyone with her when she came in. She paid her bill, she made her deposits. She asked how people's families were doing, and she went home. Lorena paused. She was private. Some people are. Some people are. I thought about all the things I didn't know about my grandmother. I thought about the box of letters I'd found in her bedroom closet when I was moving in, tied with kitchen twine, that I hadn't opened because it felt like reading someone's mail. I thought about the photograph on her dresser of a man I'd asked about once when I was a kid, and she'd said, "Someone I knew," in a tone that meant that was all I was getting. I thought about how she'd come to every single one of my school plays and every basketball game I ever played and never once missed a church service in 40 years, and how I'd thought I knew her and realized sitting in that bank chair that I had known the version of her she chose to show me. Franklin Osei was a compact man in his early 50s with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of posture that suggested he'd been told his whole life to stand up straight and had decided to take that seriously. He met me in a larger conference room that smelled like the particular air conditioning of institutions, slightly recycled, faintly chemical, and he shook my hand with both of his. "I was 17 years old," he said before he'd even sat down, "and my mother's restaurant had failed its first health inspection because the stove ventilation was wrong. It wasn't a crisis, it was a fixable problem, but fixing it cost money we didn't have, and she couldn't get a loan because she'd been in the country for 3 years and had no credit history." He straightened a coaster on the conference table that didn't need straightening. Celestine Pemberton was sitting in the waiting area when my mother was getting turned down at the loan desk. They'd never met. My mother was crying, which she almost never did. Mrs. Pemberton asked what was wrong, and my mother told her, and she walked up to the loan officer and said she would co-sign. He shook his head slightly. "A stranger. My mother's restaurant, Mommy Brony's Kitchen, was open for 22 years. It closed when she retired." He looked at me. "Your grandmother came to eat there 3 or 4 times a year for 22 years. I felt something in my chest that I was not going to do anything about in a bank conference room, so I nodded. "I need to understand your situation," he said. "Not officially, personally." So I told him. I told him about the divorce and about Carmichael Lane and about Darius and his composition notebooks and the fact that I was 3 months behind on my car insurance and had been buying dented cans at the discount grocery on Pulaski because they were 30 cents cheaper, and that when I'd used that card at the Piggly Wiggly on Route 9, I'd been buying a rotisserie chicken and juice boxes, and I'd had no idea, none, that the account it was connected to held anything close to what that statement said. He listened to all of it without moving. "What do you do for work?" he asked. "HVAC technician. I freelance now since I left Meridian Climate Systems last spring." Meridian Climate Systems had been a company with 11 employees that had laid off 6 of them, including me, when the owner's son-in-law took over operational decisions and decided to restructure, which is a word that means he fired the people who'd been there longest because their salaries were the highest. I'd been there 9 years. I've got steady clients, but the work goes quiet in fall and winter. Franklin Osei nodded slowly. "You're going to need an estate attorney," he said. "The account doesn't transfer automatically without probate. We can't just hand you a check." He paused. "But I can tell you that Hartwell will cooperate fully with the estate process, and I will personally make sure it moves as quickly as possible." He looked at the table for a moment. "I also want to ask you something, and you can say no." I waited. "We have a community foundation arm. Small grants and 0 interest. Loans for people going through transitional circumstances. We don't advertise it widely because the funding is limited. And we have to be careful about how we deploy it." He folded his hands. "While the estate moves through probate, which could take 60 to 90 days, would you accept a bridge loan against your inheritance? No interest, just to stabilize things?" I looked at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because your grandmother co-signed a loan for my mother when she had absolutely no reason to," he said. "And I have been sitting in this chair for 11 years waiting for a reason to return that in some direction." I said yes. "The probate process took 83 days. I know that because I marked every one of them on the calendar in Grandma Celestine's kitchen, the one with the pictures of African American historical figures that she'd ordered from a church fundraiser catalog, and that still had her handwriting on some of the dates. Oil change, Nadia's birthday, Dr. Fraser 2 p.m., I kept her handwriting. I left every note she'd made exactly where it was. I found a probate attorney named Constance Okafor who operated out of a second-floor office above a barber shop on Meridian Street and who charged me a flat fee that came out of the bridge loan and who was so efficient and so no-nonsense that every time I came in for an update, she had already anticipated the next 3 questions. I was going to ask and answered them before I sat down. She knew a judge. Not like that. She just knew how to file things correctly the first time, which apparently is rarer than you'd think. Aunt Nadia's initial reaction to all of this was complicated. She'd had power of attorney. She'd been the one managing the estate. She had not known about the account, which was verifiable. But the not knowing carried a weight she felt personally. I could see it on her face when we sat down at Grandma Celestine's kitchen, table together. The same table we'd eaten Sunday dinners at for 30 years, with the chairs that made a specific sound on the tile floor that I'd been hearing since I was 4 years old. She told me she kept a little something, Nadia said. She kept turning her coffee mug in circles on the table. She said she had a little something put away. I thought she meant like a burial policy. A few thousand? She shook her head. Mama didn't tell people things. You know how she was? You couldn't push her. You couldn't. That was true. If Celestine Pemberton had decided something was her business and not yours, no force on this earth was getting it out of her. She'd told me once, when I was maybe 12 and had asked her about something I'd overheard between her and Nadia, baby, some things I keep right here. And she'd put her hand over her chest, because they're mine. You understand? Some things are just mine. I hadn't understood then. I did now. The question of who the money was supposed to go to, whether she'd had a will, whether she'd expressed wishes to anyone, was one Constance Okafor navigated carefully. There was no will. Grandma Celestine had not left a will, which Constance said was not uncommon, and which meant the estate went through intestate succession, which in our state meant it went to her living children. My father, Reginald, who had passed away in 2019, and Aunt Nadia. Because my father was gone, his share passed to me as his child. I want to say there was drama with Nadia, because in a different version of this story there would be. There would be lawyers and accusations and family, members choosing sides and holidays that became casualties of the fallout. But Nadia sat at that kitchen table and did the math herself and said, Reggie would have wanted Darius taken care of. And Mama would have wanted that too. She squeezed my hand across the table, her rings pressing into my knuckles, and said, Just don't forget where you came from. I told her I would never. I meant it. The morning the funds cleared into my account, my own account, the one with my name on it, at Hartwell Community Bank where I had opened a new account specifically for this. I was sitting in that same kitchen making Darius a real breakfast. Eggs scrambled the way he liked them, a little soft, with the hot sauce on the side because he was 7, and thought hot sauce made everything more serious. He was at the table with his composition notebook. I put the plate in front of him and my phone buzzed on the counter. I looked at the notification. I put the phone face down on the counter. I sat across from my son and watched him eat his eggs and draw whatever he was drawing. And I thought about a woman who had ironed her uniform on Sunday, nights long after there was no job to wear it to, who had gone to a bank. She'd banked it since 1974 and deposited a portion of every paycheck she'd ever gotten into an account she never told anyone about, who had co-signed a loan for a stranger because a stranger was crying and Celestine Pemberton did not look away from people who were crying. I thought about all the Sunday dinners at this table and all the things I didn't know about her and all the things I was still finding out. What are you drawing? I asked Darius. He turned the notebook around to show me. It was a house, our house. Grandma Celestine's house, with the front porch and the 2 big windows, and even the mailbox that leaned a little to the left. He'd written something at the top in his blocky 7-year-old handwriting. I had to turn my head slightly to read it. It said, our house. I didn't say anything for a minute. The eggs were getting cold and the morning light was coming through the window over the sink, the same way it probably had for 50 years, and the house smelled like cedar and Pond's cold cream and something warm and old, and specific that I still couldn't name. Yeah, I said. That's our house. I paid off my car insurance that afternoon. I put money aside for Darius's school account. I bought a new stove for the kitchen. Not a fancy one, a reliable one, because the pilot light on the old one had been going out and I'd been relighting it manually for 4 months. I took Nadia to dinner at a restaurant on Crestwood. avenue that had white tablecloths and a bread basket that came before. You even ordered? The kind of place neither of us had been to in a long time. And she wore her good earrings and told stories about Grandma Celestine that I'd never heard. And I wrote 3 of them down on a napkin when Nadia went to the restroom so I wouldn't forget. Franklin Ozzie sent me a letter, handwritten, on Hartwell Community Bank stationery. He said that his mother still made her okra stew the same way she had in the restaurant, and that she had asked him to tell me that Celestine was a good woman. I put the letter in the box with the other letters from my grandmother's closet, the ones tied with kitchen twine that I still hadn't opened, because I was waiting until I felt ready, until I felt like I could sit with all of it at once. All the things she kept right there, against her chest because they were hers. They were hers. And somehow, without her having to say a word, she'd made sure they'd get to where they were supposed to go.